We'll find you one. Today we're going to talk about how we have to look in our rearview mirror sometimes. Do you ever have a set of circumstances where something that you've already fixed provides a frame of reference so you can figure out what it is that's wrong? It used to irritate me, like one time I drew a vehicle and it was running some peculiar kind of a way that was very distinctive. And for some reason or another, I managed to figure that one out really fast. And then I just, got the car fixed and test drove it and gave the ticket back to dispatch and told them what I did and all that. Well, the next time around, what I did was I wound up, be careful, I want to walk back and forth between there. But anyway, the next time around, about 2 or 3 weeks later, another vehicle just like that one came in running exactly the same way, and I'd worked on so many cars in between I couldn't remember what it was that I did to fix the first one, and I had to go about it the hard way. I mean, I just kind of got lucky the first time. But the one that beats you up is the one that you remember. Okay? So experience is a great teacher. That's where I was getting at right there. And remembering previous repairs can teach us which mistakes not to make again. Has anybody made a mistake in here that you know not to make again?
Don't break bolts.
Don't break the bolts. Yeah, you learned that because you had to drill them out. And what about when you're taking the gas tank off? Make sure everything's disconnected from it so you don't jank it apart.
What if you learn something from somebody else?
That's smart too. If you watch a mistake they made and say, well, I'm not going to make the mistake they made. That's smart. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Yeah, you learn which tool works best for the hard to get to bolt. Whenever you've done the same job over and over again, this is like when I went over one day to where Jimmy was at a Ford place. That sort of surprised me, because anybody that's pulled the transmission out of one of these, Tauruses or Windstars or something, first time you do it, it takes you a while. But I went in there one day and I said, what are you going to do to this Windstar? He just pulled it in, was raising it up. He goes, I got to pull the transmission out of it because it's got a seal leaking behind the torque converter. And I just folded my arms and just stood there and watched him. And it was like 40 minutes. He didn't even use power tools except for the cradle. He had that thing sitting on the bench. And pulling it out and putting it back in takes like 6-7 hours. And so, you pop the thing out, put a seal in it, gets it back in, he gets it out there in a couple of hours, And some people are just like that. He didn't even look like he was working all that fast, but he was working steady. You know the story of the tortoise and the hare? Have you ever looked away because you thought that this thing wasn't going to be full for a while, and when you look back it's running over because you looked away a little longer than you thought? Which tool works best for the hard to get to bolt? That's something you learn. It makes you faster on the next job. You knew exactly which socket extension or what wrench you're going to have, instead of saying, I'm going to try this, that won't work. Now let me try that. No, I can't get in there with that one. But you already know, because you already done a lot of them, you get faster when you're doing the same kind of job, or you get better at picking the right one the first time. What to look for when you see a particular symptom or code, how to figure out what's wrong, even if you haven't seen it before. If you hadn't seen it before, you got to be smart enough to figure out what it is. That's critical thinking. That's being able to solve a problem even if you haven't seen that particular problem before. Or even if you're totally unfamiliar with the system, you can figure it out. All right, now, we all got to do jobs that we hadn't worked on before. One of the things that used to really irritate the stuffings out of me was when I was working over there and some guy that would come over there that was, be working, and he'd say, can you come over here and show me how to do so-and-so on this particular car? And I'd say, why do you need help with that? And he'd say, well, I haven't ever done one of these before. And when you're working in a new car dealership, you're going to find a lot of stuff that you haven't done before that you're going to have to figure it out on the way. And you shouldn't have to have somebody wanting to hold your hand all the time. Of course, you don't want to bust something or mess anything up. But on the other hand, everybody's got to be smart enough to figure out stuff they've never seen before sooner or later. Flying blind can be costly. One time a friend of mine, him and his wife had a car just like this one here. Paid $17,000 for it, brand new in 1987. And so we went, and I was, they drove it for pretty good few miles. The odd thing about this car, I had a distributor on one end of the head over there. Whenever it rained, it wouldn't run right. And everybody worked on it to try to straighten it out, but the way the coil was laid in there on the bottom of the distributor, get a little moisture in there when it rained, and it'd spin, and all that stuff. But anyway, one way or another, she said it's not running quite right, and I want to have it looked at. So I got in it one morning and I drove it to the Ford place. Never had worked on a Toyota Camry before. So I pulled it in there, and I said, I got to pull the cover off, and it's the engine just like this one on the stand out here, and I saw that it had jumped about 3 teeth. That's why it wasn't running good. It hadn't jumped time completely to where it was dead in the water, but it had jumped about 3 teeth. All right, and so here I wound up, I hadn't done one of these before, so I said, well, this doesn't look like it's too terribly bad. So I pulled all that off and I went ahead and, I was putting a timing belt on it, but I didn't know where the marks were. And there was no all data. I didn't have a shop manual for a Toyota. Didn't want to put it together wrong. So what I did was, I got this thing over here. I found out where the TDC was, but I didn't have any idea where the cam gear timing mark was. This one out here has got the little hole in it, and I had never seen that before in those days. All right, so I asked the guy at the Toyota place. And this has always been a mystery to me because I distinctly remember this. All right, so this guy said, you see this little mark right over here? He told me, he described it on the phone, and I said, yeah. He said, line that hole up with that mark right there. And it made sense because, heck, that thing lines up perfectly with that mark. You remember the one we got on this one out here? It's got a mark like that. And this is the notch you're supposed to line that up with. Now, I'm sure somebody somewhere that's a lot more familiar with Toyotas that, has worked with Toyota engineers can tell you what the sound the hell that mark is doing there. This is not an interference engine. It won't bend the valves even if it jumps time. What that mark there is for, I have no idea, but it lines up perfectly with that hole. All right, so anyway, and this right here, I would swear to this on a court of law. I put that thing up with that hole lined up right there, and that thing started and ran. Now, sometime later, I did another one that way, and it didn't start and run, and I couldn't figure out, why did this guy tell me that was the mark, if that was a mark, and also, how did this one start and run when I put it together, unless I was goofy enough to where I got it that much out of time? I don't know, but anyway. So, that's what it looks like when you take that gear off of there. You got that. And that. And this one right here looks like it ought to be the mark to me, but that's the mark right there. You're supposed to line up that camera. You always remember that. Okay, so I'm going to go on past that and see how you're supposed to line it. You can actually look up right now in the 1987 Toyota shop manual, and it tells you to put it right there. All right, so looking back, in that particular case, the next one I did kind of blew up in my face because I was just looking back and doing it from memory. So, when we're familiar with the vehicle we're working on, we might find a failed part that doesn't ordinarily fail. Now, Jonathan, you've done enough work where when you see a particular vehicle that's given let me ask you this, if you've got a, let's say if Matt sends you out there and he says, I'm sending you out there like a 6-liter Power Stroke, right? It's a no start, comes in on the hook.
Take it, pull it in there and pull the sensor out of the valve filter. Put some air to it and command the ICP to close and see if I hear any air leaks.
Bingo. Close the ICP, air up the high pressure oil system, and see if that tube is split. That's a good deal. See, basically you're trying to see if there's any kind. Well, if it won't hold air, it won't hold oil, and the air pressure is not enough to hurt nothing. Right? Even if you put 150 pounds of air pressure, it's not going to hurt it.
Right, because it's got like 1,200 something pounds of oil pressure.
Well, it's got a lot more than that. Whenever it's got several thousand.
I'm just saying the crank has got to have 12,000 pounds.
Yeah, it's got a ton. It's got to have a lot. But anyway, one way or another, when you're talking about those today, well, if you find out, sometimes you wind up in a situation. I've seen this before. I know what's wrong with it. You check it out. You remember the one I told you about the Taurus that I put so many fuel pumps in them because the fuel pumps were dying back in the 80s, and I pulled one in there. I didn't hear the fuel pump. Same song, second verse, popped the fuel pump in it, still wouldn't start. And then I found out it was a ground over at the battery. It was chalky, but you couldn't see it. When you unplugged it, oh my gosh, look at this chalk everywhere. It wasn't anything you could see just looking, even if you opened the hood to the visual inspection. And that was through a fuel pump. Anyway.
So did you charge him for a fuel pump?
Well, what I did, but what I told them, about what I was selling, I said, I could put that other fuel pump back in there, and I don't mind doing that. But what happens is, these fuel pumps are failing all the time anyway. If I put the old fuel pump back in, that's a bad bet, man. That's like going around without a spare tire. You know what I'm saying? I can put the old one back in there, but what if it dies next week? Not only will they be back, but they'll be back and they'll want it for free. And the people I was working for will probably give it to them. See what I mean? So I said, I'm protecting them. They paid for a fuel pump, but they got a fuel pump. Truth to tell, I didn't hurt them none because nobody had ever put a fuel pump in that car before. Now, I have seen them that came out here that, like there was a Montana that came out here one time that didn't have fuel pump operation. And so when we checked it with the test slide, it didn't have any power going back there. And I says, okay, while we got the test slide hooked up between hot and the fuel pump terminal coming out of this relay, let's kick the gas tank with our big boot. Kick the gas tank, light comes on. That typically means your brushes have gone to sleep in your pump. Well, in this particular case, that ain't what it was. There was a wire going through right in front of the, as I remember, right in front of the wheel well, and this thing had salt splash that had splashed up on it, and it was all corroded. And we didn't know that until we pulled the gas tank off and we pulled it with a brand spanking new fuel pump in there, and there was nothing wrong with it. That's when we went looking somewhere else. We didn't put a fuel pump in that one on. Anyway, so we got to be candid and backtrack. We got to find out why the part failed. Like if we got something that killed a part, and we just put the part on there without thinking about what killed it, somebody's not going to be happy because it's going to fail again. So who should pay for the second part? You know, occasionally the manufacturer will tell you that. We had a Lincoln that came in here one day we were working on, and it basically wouldn't, it had a real low idle. And so we put an idle air control on it, and it still had a real low idle. And they found out that the new idle air control was shorted internally, and it burned up the engine controller. So we had to get another engine controller for it, because I could take that thing, it's supposed to be 10 ohms across the idle air control, and I measured it with my meter, it was shorted, dead short. And so then I got a hold of, Standard Ignition, that's who sold it to us through Sam. Sam gave us another engine controller because he was a parts guy and he was trying to do everything up with it, but Standard Ignition never, even though I wrote letters and explained to them, sent the old part back and everything else, they never would pay him for that engine controller. But anyway, identical quagmire here. See this guy right here, he's not happy with it. All right. Even if we don't like the answer, it's a foregone conclusion, somebody's going to be unhappy. A lot of times the parts people will help you with it though. Now this Cherokee was clean inside and out with only 33,000 miles showing on it. And this soldier and his wife spotted it on a used car lot. It was a beautiful vehicle. This is an actual picture of that Jeep. It's absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so the price was right, the paperwork was done, and the man and his wife drove away, and since the engine oil was fresh, they drove it 6,000 miles before having it changed. Right after they changed the oil pressure dropped to 7 pounds. I mean, as soon as they changed it. And so after it heated up, after the oil change, the pressure dropped to 0. That's what it looked like. That was with the engine running, okay? All right, Technician A says the oil pump must be bad. Technician B says it might have the wrong oil filter installed. Technician C says the only smart thing to do is replace the engine. Technician D says you can add a quart of motor honey and it'll be all right. All right, what do you say? What's the next best step?
I think somebody,
Huh?
I think the oil pump's bad in it. Somebody took and poured like gear oil or something in it and make it run.
I've seen that happen too. I mean, I got another story about that, but it was about a boat that I worked on. All right. Some Jeep Cherokee 4-liter engines, listen to this. Some Jeep Cherokee 4-liter engines have the relief valve for the oil pump built into the oil filter.
Yeah, I was about to say that the oil filter sound like this.
Now, all oil filters have got a bypass valve built into them. In case the filter stops up, they'll push it open so they can get, the engine can get oil if in case the oil filter stops up. But some of them, the relief valve, all these 4 liters, you gotta know which one it is, and if the filters look just alike, they just got the same, a different part number. Put the wrong filter on one, you'll destroy the engine. It happened 2 times in Dothan back in the 90s at an oil change place over there. And the oil change, express oil change, it wasn't them, it was somebody else. But anyway, they put the wrong oil filter on because they just had these oil filters and they say, well, this one here goes on that last year model's Jeep, it ought to work on this one. So they screwed it on, cranked it up, wound up with no oil pressure because the relief valve is what gives you oil pressure, right? At the tire store where the oil change was done, they were already looking in their rearview mirror. The oil filter was the right one. There was nothing wrong with the oil. So the sending unit had been replaced and the engine didn't seem to be rattling like the oil pressure was low. So what the heck's going on here? A master gauge was installed and determined the true oil pressure was evident. It was indeed low. When you put the master gauge on it, it's telling you the truth. Put it on there the right way. Take your oil sending unit out, screw that in, check it for oil pressure. Some of you guys did that last semester. What's this guy doing? Listen to him. How did you know that so quick? As soon as you saw that, you knew what he was doing. How did you know?
Because he did it.
And because you and your dad just got through putting cam bearings in the one you're building, right?
Yeah.
And when I put this slide in there, I says, Justin's gonna go bam, right away, he's gonna know what it is, because he went through this, didn't he?
Yeah.
Same tool, put the cam bearings in there. All right, the dealer verified low oil pressure, took it to the dealer, They said, yep, oil pressure's low, let's put an oil pump in it. That's what you were talking about. Not a bad idea, right? It was at this point, the store owner called me, laid the situation out, asked for my advice, and this is what I said. Don't just throw an oil pump at it. Put some oil pressure in the oil gallery. When you pull the pump off, you got the place where the oil pump pumps oil up in there. See if you can determine where the oil pressure is going. You've already got the pan off. You can already look up there. You can see everything, right? Okay, the oil pump had been changed, but the low pressure problem is still there. Did they put air in there? No, they did not. They just slammed an oil pump on it, hope it'd be aight. But it wasn't. The customer took the oil pressure came up a little bit, but not enough to make it safe. So he gave them only one choice. We got to have a $5,000 engine. So here they were, stuck with a vehicle they couldn't sell, couldn't drive, and couldn't afford to fix. That's nasty, isn't it? Can't drive it, can't sell it, can't afford to fix it. This was a U.S. serviceman. Nice guy. What?
When they put the new oil pump in it, they didn't put a new filter and all on. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm sure they probably did. But whatever happened, you know, they had an issue. So he qualified for work, and I told Mike, I said, you know, the guy's qualified for work because he's in the Army. He's like, send him over here, you know. So he sent him over here. That's what that thing looked like with the pan off of it. First thing we did after verifying the low oil pressure concern, I told him to put some motor honey in it and drive it on over here. That's what they did. They poured a bunch of that stuff in there and brought it on over here because that brought the pressure up. So drain the crankcase, pull the oil pan, and we pull this shiny new oil pump off and applied a rubber tip blower to the oil gallery, and I heard a bunch of leaking. Psh, looking up in there, you're not supposed to hear a whole lot. Around the cam bearings, I saw all kinds of air coming out of there. So this means we need cam bearings. You're going to get to do this next semester, aren't you? All right. Now here's where your leakage is coming from. There's your camshaft. There's your crankshaft. The oil pump picks up the oil. Here's your relief valve right here. If that relief valve spring is broke or if that thing's stuck open, you will not have oil pressure. All right, you got a little filter bypass valve right here, and then you get your oil pressure switch right there, and then this is feeding the crank. See, the crank's cross drilled like that, so every one of them can get pressurized lube. Now look at this, coming right off of that main rail, you're going straight up here, right? But the first part of it started to die, it suffered from that oil pressure, was right up here, okay? Now you can pressure up the oil system through the oil, you take the oil sending unit out and pressure it up. This is kind of what you were talking about doing a while ago. Well, except in a different place, but you can pressure it up through the place where the oil sending unit goes, but if you do hear leakage, you don't know where it's going. Now like 6 liter, you know, its tube is split. That's usually where that is, you know. But on the Cherokee 4 liter, what?
Or the backs of the pumps blow
Yep.
out the pump.
There you go. On the 4 liter, the oil is picked up by the pump, pushed through the oil filter up to the lifters where a small amount makes its way to the hollow, through these hollow push rods to the rocker arms, and the lion's share of the oil goes from there through 4 drill passages that pass the cam bearing. Actually, that wasn't an accurate thing because there were only 4 cam bearings on this one, right? And it feeds the crankshaft, the rod bearings, and so on and so forth. That's what the motor looks like in there. So what's supposed to happen now? This is actually the cam bearing that we saw when we pulled that off. That's a photo of the cam bearing we pulled off there. Matter of fact, this is kind of funny. This was an article I wrote. If you put something, if you actually type in on Google search, bad cam bearings, this picture will come up from the article that I wrote. Because it's online. Yeah.
Why did it have good oil pressure until they changed the oil?
Yeah, I was about to-
Because they had a bunch of motor honey in it.
So,
They bought it at an auction. It had changed hands 4 times. And I don't know, I think the oil pump died because he said whenever we was asking him, and I'll tell you this again in a minute, he said when they took the oil pump off, they could hear the gear rattling in it. So the oil pump died, pretty much, got lost where it didn't have good oil pressure, and it destroyed the bearings. And they were here in a racket, somebody did, and they poured a bunch of, the thick stuff in it. And that will quieten one down. That's like putting bananas in the rear end, it's wild, And so they did that just to get it through the sales. Well, the cam bearings on the 4 liter, and there's too many of them here, supposed to be only 4, look almost exactly alike, but they're selective in size and design and have to be installed in the proper journals. My guys discovered this while checking clearances, the people I had working on it there. New OE cam bearings are color coded and come with an instruction sheet. The sealed power bearings, they just came in a box. But the sealed power bearings have got sequential part numbers and you're supposed to follow those.
Yeah,
So you knew that, didn't you?
yeah.
All right, so right here is the, you know, the bearings right there. And this, cam bearing looks like that right there. But this is where I saw the air leaking out, by the way, in 2 or 3 places. There's sequential and so on and so forth. I already told you that. Well, with the engine put back in, we had to pull the engine out. And to do that, by the way, on that, Wrangler, on that Jeep Cherokee, you gotta pull the radiator and you gotta pull the front off of it. You gotta kinda come out the front. You don't come out the top, you come out the front with it. And that Wrangler may be the same way. You may have to pull the front off of it to get it out. So don't just try to.
You just gotta pull the radiator and all out of them because it undone.
Yeah, well, on that one, they pull the whole front off of it. Yeah, because it worked really good that way. One way or another, total oil pressure reading of 60 PSI after we fixed it. Burped the air, recharged the AC system. They drove it for almost an hour. When they returned, the oil pressure was sitting on about 40 PSI. And that's a picture of the gauge the way it was. All right, now, why did the oil pressure go away to begin with? That's when I called them up. And they said when they pull the oil pump off, they could shake it and they could hear these gears rattling. And they were still moving some oil, but they didn't have the nice tight clearance as they were supposed to have. That's not the actual oil pump, but that was the kind of oil pump it's got on it. Full oil pump, spin the gears, that seemed to be loose when he shook the pump. Now, he didn't have the pump for me to look at, and I wish he had. I'd like to take it apart. Well, the relief valve's built into the pump on this one, and usually that's the way it is. I saw this guy one time, and he rebuilt a little 3.8 on an older little LTD, and after he rebuilt that whole engine and put, crankshaft kit and all that stuff in there, he cranked it up, and it didn't have oil pressure, and he burned it up again. Because on that particular engine he was working on, the relief valve is somewhere else. It's not in the oil pump. If the relief valve somewhere else is not in the oil pump, you would be aware of that. I've seen engines totally rebuilt, like I say, after the failure. They didn't find out why it failed to begin with, but here's how your relief valve works. Basically, when it stopped up, this spring is calibrated, and when the oil pump has to push that back, if it takes 50, 60 pounds of pressure to push it back, it's got to hold it back. See, it actually automatically regulates it by putting it back to the sump when it's got enough pressure to push that back, and that goes to the oil filter. All right, which wear-prone component of an engine receives unfiltered oil? One of these receives unfiltered oil.
Pump, timing gears.
Huh?
Pump.
He's right. The oil pump, it does have a funky little screen there, but, one day there was a guy that came in here, and he says, he had work on his little pickup truck, and he says, I've lost oil pressure. And I says, well, you've probably got, I don't remember how I arrived at this conclusion. I said, I think your oil screen's probably stopped up. And, somebody probably needs to pull the pan and do that. You know what that knothead did? He drained the oil out of that thing right out there laying in the grass. And he took oil, when the oil drain plug out of it, he shined a little flashlight up in there and he could see that thing. And he got up in there with a screwdriver and he scraped it off and he sprayed some stuff in there and cleaned it. And he put oil in it and got his pressure back and he drove off on it and did it right by himself, laying there in the grass. He was thinking, this was critical thinking, guys. Once he found out what needed to be done, he didn't ask for nobody to do it for him.
Stop right up again.
Well, maybe so, but,
he was spray that cleaner up in there and wash the pan out.
Yeah, if you wash the pan out and get that crud out of it, yeah, what did he have to lose,
Stuff that is draining ain't gonna come.
I don't know what the end of the story was, but I thought that was pretty cool. In a motor oil classified CF4SH, what does C stand for? You're looking at a motor oil on the can, it says CF4SH.
Compression fired.
Huh? Compression fired. That's diesel oil. You should know that. All right. Compression fired. So that means it's a diesel, right? Now, can you use spark fired oil in a diesel engine? Not a good idea.
You can use diesel oil and gas motor.
You sure can. You can go one way, but you can't go the other. You can put the diesel oil in the gas motor. It's okay. Shell Rotella. Technician A says any oil filter that's the right size and has the same thread will work.
No.
Technician B says some engines can be destroyed by using the wrong oil filter.
Yes.
All right, we knew that one already. Technician A says late ignition timing can cause a speed density fuel injection system to run rich and force the fuel trim readings to the negative. Technician B says an erroneously low barrel reading will drive fuel trim figures to the positive. Somebody give me an answer for that. You ought to know.
Okay.
We talked about this last week. What does late ignition timing do? Why would late ignition timing on a speed density fuel system cause it to run rich?
Because it's trying to catch up to itself.
Because late ignition timing does what to the engine
Retards
vacuum?
the time,
Well, yeah, but the engine vacuum does what when you got retarded
it
timing?
goes down.
Goes down. When you got that, you've got low engine vacuum, and you got, it thinks it's more of a load, it puts more gas in there. This guy one time came to me over there, and he had this, you know those old Broncos like Parnelli Jones did the Baja on, the little square boxy ones back in the early 70s? He had one of those, and he had put a Mustang engine in it with fuel injection on it, and he had cammed it up, built it all up and everything, and when it was idling, it just ran rich as a dog. But whenever he was driving down the road, it ran good. Why you suppose? The cam lowered the vacuum, the map sensor was confused by that, thought it was under load when it wasn't, and at idle. Of course, the vacuum came up and you're driving down the road. So how do you fix that? He's got $28,000 invested in this vehicle, and it's running rich and trying to foul the plugs when it's idling. How can you fix that?
Stop the cam back in.
No.
Tune it.
I mean, you're gonna have to drop some money in it, but you can get a mass airflow kit. You get a mass airflow kit, comes with an engine controller, comes with a mass airflow sensor, even comes with a fancy little electronic doodad over there that's got some numbers on it. You can actually dial in the, you know, what you're wanting, adjust the idle mixture with it. And that's what we did. We got it's like a $500 kit. Something else you can get, like on some of these old Jeeps, it's got a carburetor on them, it always like to, you know, smoke up the wall when you crank it up in the morning and all that. Some of them older Jeeps with V8s in them. I'm talking about Wranglers and whatnot, or the old CJs. And you can get a fuel injection kit and put on one of them, and boy, is it ever sweet. Costs $1,000. Boy, will it run good. You wonder where, you know, where it's been all your life. Each of the following statements is true except A, all engine oil pumps are positive displacement pumps, true or false? What is a positive displacement pump? When it turns, something's going somewhere, right? Okay, 10 PSI per 1,000 RPM is the minimum acceptable oil pressure.
True.
That's true. So if you've got, per 1,000 RPM, if you've got 10 PSI, you're okay. The lifters receive oil pressure right after the oil leaves the filter. Well, on that schematic that we saw a while ago,
Well, not on all, it's not on.
well, okay, I'll give you that. But on the one that we're talking about,
Which one are we talking about?
the Jeep 4-liter,
Yeah, sure.
the cam bearings on any engine are interchangeable from bore to bore. You know, the one that's least rough. And you're gonna get ASC questions that say all of these is true except,
Yeah.
so
You
don't
can
fall
get-
in a trap.
Like on mine, if you get like the small, like one of the smaller bearings and try to put it in the big bore, it's just gonna slide straight through.
Yep.
That's right.
There you go. Now, every engine's not like that. Not every engine.
460s and 429s.
Yep.
Hell, that stands up.